the Greek system of classification of climate. One is, this system of classification is based only on temperature. Another criticism of this system of classification of climate is that it was too simple, and because of this, people thought it was not, competent enough to give us adequate classification of climate around the world. And another one is that it ignores the influence of altitude and latitude, as well as vegetation and wind system. And it fails to recognize climates such as those of the humid and desert regions. So the second system of climate classification is the Copenhagen System. This system was devised by Dr. W. Copenhagen, of the University of Grace, Australia in 1918. The basis for Copenhagen System of climate classification is temperature and rainfall. It is the best known system of climate classification. Now, he identified 5 major climatic groups which correspond with the 5 principal vegetation groups and are represented by capital letters as follows. The A type, which is known as the tropical rainy climate, has the following features. 1. It is moist and hot. It is a moist and hot climate. It has average monthly temperature that is above 18 degrees Celsius. And it has heavy rainfall throughout the year, which exceeds annual evaporation. The B type, which is described as a dry climate, it has annual evaporation which exceeds the annual rainfall, and it lacks surplus water, and aridity is also pronounced in this type of climate. And finally, no river flows permanently in regions with this type of climate. The C type, described usually as the warm, temperate, rainy climate, has the following properties or features. One is that the average temperature of the coldest month is below 18 degrees Celsius, but above -3 degrees Celsius. Now, the average temperature of the warmest month is over 10 degrees Celsius. And this type of climate has both summer and winter seasons. Let's also look at the D type, described also as snowy and cold climate. This climate, or in this type of climate, the average temperature of the coldest month is below 3 degrees Celsius, whereas the average warmest month is above 10 degrees Celsius. And this climate also has frozen ground and snow cover for several months. Lastly, we have the E type, described as the polar climate. The polar climate has an average temperature of the warmest month that is below 10 degrees Celsius. This climate lacks warm seasons, and the precipitation is in the form of snow. Now, the above 5 climatic groups that have been mentioned under this Copenhagen system of classification are further subdivided into different subgroups as follows. The A type has what we call the AF, AM, and AW subgroups. The B type has BS, BW subgroups, and C has CW, CS, and CF subgroups. The D type of climate has the DF, DW subgroups, and finally E has ET and EF subgroups. Now, this AF, AM, AW, and all other letters we have mentioned have their different meanings and what they represent. So from the note here, you will see that the small letters, the F, S, W, and M reflect how seasonal precipitation is, and they mean the following. Now F represents no dry season generally, whereas S represents no dry season in summer, and W talking about no dry season in winter, and M represents moderate dry seasons in winter and in summer. The capital letters also, which include the S, capital letter S, and W, show the two subdivisions of the climate. S means steppe or semi-desert, while W means, on the other hand, desert or arid regions. However, in polar climates, we all have capital letters T and F. And T represents the tundra climate, and F represents the ice cap. Just like previous system we talked about, the Greek system of climate classification. The Copenhagen system also has some advantages, which probably makes it to be considered as the best system of climate classification currently. Now we'll look at some of its advantages. It is simple to understand. It is commonly used in teaching at different levels of education or educational institutions. It is quantitative because numerical values are used for defining boundaries of climatic groups. However, there are some disadvantages associated with the Copenhagen system of classification. You can remember when we were talking about AF, AM, TS, and the rest. This is one of the disadvantages of the Copenhagen system of classification. There are so many letters involved, and these letters could be confusing. So that's a disadvantage in the Copenhagen climatic system of classification. Another disadvantage is that it does not consider climate of highlands, and there is no clear-cut distinction of one climate form from another. So from this, we can answer these few questions. Question 1 says, briefly describe the Greek classification of climate, the Greek system of climate classification. Now, to answer this question, you first need to understand that there are two classification systems, the Greek and the Copenhagen system of classification. Now, the Greek classification is one of the earliest systems of classification, and this was designed by the Greek people. The Greek system of classification basis its mode of classification on temperature, just temperature, and it divides the world into 3 climatic zones, which are the torrid zone, the temperate zone, and the frigid zone. So with this plate here, with this figure, you must have, or you should have been able to describe vividly the Greek system of classification. The second question is, give reasons why the system is not popularly accepted. Now, what system are we talking about? What system does it imply? From the first question, we are asked Greek system of classification. So definitely, the second question is referring to, and we are asked to give reasons why that system of classification is not popularly accepted, as opposed to the case of the Copenhagen system of classification of climate. Now, few reasons are responsible for this non-generality of acceptance when it comes to do with the Greek system of climate classification. One reason is that this system of classification, is based or was based only on temperature. And the system also ignores the influence of altitude and latitude, as well as vegetation and the wind system. The system also fails to recognize climates such as those of the humid or arid or like the desert regions. So these reasons are responsible for that non-generality or acceptance of the Greek system of classification of climate. Now lastly, let's take question 3, which says, list and explain 4 factors responsible for the variation of climate from one part of the world to another. So many factors are responsible, but the question requires 4. One of these factors include the latitude. Latitude refers to location of a place on the Earth's surface in relation to the equator. Some places are located where they are closer to the sun, whereas others are located farther away from the sun. So based on the position or the location of a place on the Earth's surface in relation to the equator, some parts will tend to experience hotter temperature or to have hotter temperature than some parts. So latitude is one factor. Another factor here is altitude. Altitude refers to the height of a place above the sea level. Now the higher one moves into the atmosphere, the temperature decreases by 6.5 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 meter